Thanks for clicking enjoy the video. Hi, Reddit. I, 29F, am an avid dog lover and a big fan of road trips. I've got a sweet Bernese mountain dog, Charlie, who's my go-to adventure buddy. Ever since I adopted him 3 years ago, Charlie and I have had a little tradition. We go on a big road trip every autumn, exploring new places, visiting dog-friendly spots, and just unwinding together. This year, I've spent weeks planning a trip down the coast, carefully choosing dog-friendly parks, beaches, and even accommodations that cater to pets. Charlie is an ideal travel buddy. He's calm, enjoys car rides, and loves being outdoors, so these trips are really special for us. I usually take time off work for these adventures, and it's one of the few times in the year where I get to totally disconnect and just be in the moment with my dog. A couple of weeks ago, my friend Sarah, 28F, and I were chatting over coffee, and I happened to mention my upcoming trip with Charlie. Sarah also has a dog, Max, a high-energy, 2-year-old Labrador. Max is a sweet dog, but he's very high energy, and honestly, he can be a handful. He doesn't travel well. The last time I saw him in a car, he wouldn't stop barking, jumping around, and getting restless within the first 30 minutes. Sarah's eyes lit up when I mentioned the trip, and she immediately said, "Oh, that sounds perfect. Max and I can come along, and the dogs can keep each other company." I felt my stomach drop. While I do enjoy Sarah's company and Max is a nice dog, this was meant to be a quiet getaway for just Charlie and me. Plus, having 2 dogs with totally different temperaments could make the trip a lot more chaotic, especially since Max can be unpredictable around other dogs. Trying to be gentle, I said something like, "I totally get why that sounds fun, but I think this time it's just going to be Charlie and me. We've got kind of a special routine." Sarah seemed surprised and a little hurt, but she just nodded and said, "All right, I get it. I was just thinking it would be fun for the dogs." I thought that was the end of it, until the next day. Sarah texted me, saying that Max had been acting up lately and that he could really use a change of scenery. She said it would mean a lot if I could reconsider and let Max come, even if just for a portion of the trip. She tried to appeal to my love for dogs, saying, "If you're really such a dog lover, wouldn't you want Max to enjoy a fun adventure, too?" I'll admit, the guilt started to creep in. I do love dogs, and the idea of Max having a nice trip isn't something I'm against in general. But bringing him would mean dealing with his energy levels, managing 2 dogs in unfamiliar places, and honestly, it would change the whole vibe of my trip with Charlie. So, Reddit, am I being unreasonable here? Should I let Max join even though this trip has always been about bonding with Charlie? After our initial conversation, I thought Sarah understood where I was coming from. But a couple of days later, she brought it up again, this time with a new angle. She texted me, saying, "Look, Max has been so bored lately, and this trip could be a chance for him to get his energy out. You have no idea how crazy he's been at home." She went on about how she doesn't have the time to take Max on long outings and how he would benefit so much from a real adventure. I didn't want to be rude, so I replied politely, reiterating that I'd planned this as a solo trip with Charlie. I emphasized that managing 2 dogs, especially one who's much more energetic, could be stressful on the road, especially in places neither of us had been before. The following weekend, Sarah invited me to brunch with a few friends we have in common. I was excited to catch up with everyone, but as soon as we sat down, Sarah started talking about the trip, sharing how excited we were about the idea of going. I was caught off guard since I hadn't agreed to bring her along, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just joking. Then, she dropped this bombshell. "I just don't get why OP doesn't want to bring Max along. It's just one more dog, right? He and Charlie are practically best friends." I could feel all eyes on me, and I tried to laugh it off, gently saying that Charlie and Max had only met a couple of times and that this was a special, low-key trip I'd planned just for Charlie and me. That's when one of our friends, Alex, chimed in. He said, "Come on, OP, you're always saying how much you love dogs. It's not like you'd be dealing with a random stranger's pet." Sarah jumped in, backing Alex up, saying, "Max has been cooped up so much lately. He needs this trip as much as Charlie. Plus, it's not like he's high maintenance. He's a lab. He just wants to run around and be outside." My head was spinning. First, Max actually is high maintenance. He's a sweet dog, but he's still a lot to handle, and I knew from experience that his excitement and barking could easily spiral in a confined space like a car. But I also felt this growing sense of frustration. I'd spent weeks planning this trip for just Charlie and me, specifically looking forward to our time together. It wasn't about not loving other dogs. It was about maintaining the peace and simplicity I'd envisioned. After brunch, Sarah pulled me aside. She wasn't aggressive, but she was definitely pushier than before. "Look, I don't see why it's such a big deal. I'm not asking you to go out of your way. It's just this trip sounds perfect for Max, and it would mean a lot if you could make this work." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I explained again that the trip was planned for Charlie and me, that I wasn't trying to exclude Max out of spite, but that I felt it would be too much to handle on my own. She listened, but I could tell she wasn't happy. The next day, I got messages from a few mutual friends, subtly nudging me to reconsider. Julie, one of my close friends in the group, texted me, saying, "I totally get wanting alone time, but you know how much Sarah loves Max. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to let him tag along, just this once." I'm honestly starting to feel cornered. The trip I'd been so excited about is now turning into this point of stress. Part of me wonders if I'm being selfish by keeping it just Charlie and me, but another part of me feels like my friends are missing the point. As the trip drew closer, I could feel the stress building. My excitement over spending quality time with Charlie was now clouded by guilt and pressure from Sarah and some of our friends. Sarah had been quieter about it after our last talk, but I could tell she hadn't let it go. I was worried she'd bring it up again, and I was mentally preparing myself for how to stand my ground if she did. Then, just a few days before my planned departure, Sarah called me. Right away, I could sense a determined tone in her voice. Hey, OP, I've been thinking, she started, and I braced myself. I really don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. Max and Charlie will be fine together, and you're not even doing anything extra for me. I'd cover his food, his water, everything. All you'd have to do is drive. I took a deep breath and tried to explain, again, why bringing Max wasn't a good idea. Sarah, I get that you want Max to have fun, and I'm sure he'd love it. But this trip is something Charlie and I have done alone for years. It's our thing. Plus, I really don't think I could handle the energy levels of 2 dogs by myself. But Sarah didn't seem to be listening. Instead, she hit me with, I just feel like you're being selfish, OP. I know how much you love Charlie, but Max is a friend's dog, my dog. He deserves to enjoy life too. Don't you think he'd want to be with his friend Charlie instead of stuck at home? At that point, something in me snapped. I'd spent weeks feeling guilty, feeling like I was being unreasonable, but her pushing just made me more frustrated. Sarah, you have to understand, this isn't about Max deserving or not deserving to have fun. I've planned this trip with only one dog in mind, my dog. It's not just one more dog. It changes the whole dynamic. And, honestly, it's not fair to guilt me about it. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said, fine. I just didn't think you were the kind of friend who'd be so stubborn over something so small. She hung up, leaving me feeling both relieved and kind of hurt. But it wasn't over. The next day, I found out that Sarah had been talking to more of our friends about the situation. I started getting messages that ranged from, hey, maybe you should reconsider, to wow, I didn't realize you were so territorial about your dog. Even Julie, who I thought understood, hinted that maybe this was my chance to show some flexibility as a friend. It seemed like everyone was seeing me as the bad guy for not being willing to make this small accommodation. As if that weren't enough, Sarah texted me one more time the night before my trip. I still don't understand why you can't just let Max come. But whatever, I hope you and Charlie have fun. That, whatever, stung. Part of me wanted to just cancel the trip altogether to avoid the drama, but the other part was so frustrated that this had escalated into a full-on guilt trip. I knew if I caved now, I'd be setting a precedent, and honestly, it felt like no one was understanding where I was coming from. So I'm sitting here, bags packed and ready to go, wondering if I made the right choice. Am I really being that selfish for just wanting some quiet, quality time with my own dog? Or are my friends and Sarah overstepping? The next morning, I set out early with Charlie, trying to shake off the tension from the night before. Once we hit the open road, the stress began to fade, and I finally felt the excitement I'd been waiting for. Charlie was relaxed in the back seat, looking out the window with that happy, content expression that made these trips worth it. I realized then that I'd almost let all the pressure ruin something that meant so much to both of us. The first few days were blissful. Charlie and I visited beautiful beaches, hiked scenic trails, and I finally felt the peace I'd hoped for. Every time we reached a new spot, I thought about how much more complicated it would have been with 2 dogs, especially one as high energy as Max. I would have been constantly managing them, and I knew I wouldn't have been able to relax. This was exactly what I wanted, a chance to unwind with Charlie, free of stress and distractions. But even though the trip itself was incredible, the drama wasn't completely out of mind. I'd been checking my phone less frequently, but every now and then, I'd catch up on messages. Sarah hadn't reached out again, but a few of our mutual friends had sent texts like, hope you're having a great time, which seemed friendly on the surface, but felt loaded. One even joked, hope Charlie's not too lonely without his buddy Max, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I felt like my friends weren't seeing the bigger picture, that this wasn't just about being nice to Max or Sarah, but about the effort I'd put into planning a meaningful trip. The final day of the trip, I took Charlie to a dog-friendly winery we'd visited once before. Sitting outside with him, watching the sunset, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I realized I hadn't really had a moment like this in months, where everything just felt calm and right. I snapped a few photos of Charlie and us together, wanting to capture that memory. When I got home the next day, reality hit fast. My phone was full of unread texts and a few missed calls. I braced myself, knowing I'd have to deal with the fallout sooner or later. I texted Sarah, hoping maybe enough time had passed for things to have cooled down. Hey, I'm back. Had a great trip with Charlie. Hope you've been well. I sent, trying to keep it casual. But her response came quickly. I'm glad you and Charlie enjoyed it. Max's week was a little dull without any adventure, but you got what you wanted, so I'm sure that's what matters. I felt a pang of frustration. I'd gone over every reason why bringing Max wasn't feasible, and yet it still seemed like she thought I'd done it just to be difficult. I tried one more time to smooth things over, responding, I'm really sorry if this upset you. I just needed this time with Charlie, and I wasn't trying to hurt you or Max. Her reply was short, it's fine, Opie. I just thought you were more of a dog person, I guess. But whatever. That hurt. Being a dog person didn't mean I had to cater to everyone else's dog on a trip I'd planned for my own. But it seemed like nothing I said would change her perspective. Over the next few days, our friend group got awkward. Sarah started organizing things without inviting me, and when I did see her in group settings, she was noticeably distant. A few friends seemed a little colder, too, and I realized she must have told them her side of the story. I tried talking to Julie, one of the friends who had been encouraging me to let Max come along. I explained how special these trips were for me and Charlie, and how I didn't feel it was fair for everyone to pressure me. Julie sighed and said, I get it, Opie, but Sarah was hurt. It's like, she thought you'd want to share something you love with her dog, you know? I asked her, but at what point am I allowed to have boundaries? I planned this specifically for me and Charlie. Julie paused, then said, yeah, I guess I didn't think of it that way. Maybe it's just hard because Sarah was really looking forward to it. It was a relief to hear at least a bit of understanding, but I realized then that this might be one of those situations where no one would be entirely happy. Sarah clearly felt I'd rejected her and Max, and while I didn't think I'd done anything wrong, our friendship was undeniably strained. A few weeks after the trip, I was still dealing with the fallout from the friend group. Sarah hadn't reached out, and our interactions were awkward at best, with her making little jabs about me being overly possessive of Charlie whenever our friends were around. It stung, and part of me was still tempted to sit down with Sarah and explain my side one last time. But I also wondered if anything I said would change her perspective. In the meantime, I started opening up to some of my friends outside that circle about the situation. Surprisingly, their reactions were very different. One of my close friends, Emma, listened carefully and then said, "You know, Opie, it's completely normal to want time for yourself and your dog. A road trip with someone else's dog sounds like it would have been a lot to take on, especially if you didn't even want to in the first place." Hearing that made me realize just how much pressure I'd let Sarah and the others put on me. Emma's support gave me confidence, and I felt more secure in my decision, even if not everyone agreed with me. I knew I wasn't being selfish. I was just protecting a meaningful experience that I'd planned. A few days later, I got a message from Julie. She wrote, "Hey, Opie, I just wanted to check in. I know things have been rough between you and Sarah, but I hope you know that some of us get where you were coming from. I think Sarah's feelings got hurt, and it's been hard for her to let it go." This felt like a bit of a turning point. I replied, saying, "I know Sarah's upset, and I never wanted to hurt her, but I feel like she was pushing me into a corner, and I'm not sure what else I could have done." Julie agreed, saying that maybe everyone should have been more understanding. It was the first time someone from that friend group validated how I was feeling, and it brought some relief. Julie even suggested a get-together so that Sarah and I could hopefully have a face-to-face conversation and maybe clear the air. At first, I was hesitant, but I knew that if I wanted any closure, I'd have to talk to Sarah directly. We agreed to meet at a dog park where Charlie and Max could play while we chatted. When we met, the tension was thick. We watched the dogs run around, and finally, I spoke up. "Sarah, I know things got out of hand, and I'm sorry if you felt like I was being dismissive of you or Max. It wasn't my intention to hurt you." She sighed and said, I felt like you didn't care about Max, like you were drawing a line in our friendship. I thought if you loved dogs as much as you say you do, you'd want him along." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I do love dogs, and I care about Max. But that doesn't mean I have to share every experience with everyone's dog. My road trips with Charlie are a way for us to reconnect and relax. I didn't say no to hurt you, but because I knew it wouldn't work out the way you hoped. We sat in silence for a while, watching the dogs play. After a moment, Sarah finally nodded. "I guess I didn't think about it from your side. I was just excited for Max, and I guess I wanted to be a part of it too." In the end, we didn't have a grand resolution or a big hug, but there was a sense of understanding. Sarah agreed to give me space when it came to things I planned for just me and Charlie, and I promised to be more open about my boundaries in the future. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like we were on the path to a healthier friendship.